Why am I here? There comes a moment, not when the story ends, but when the illusion of endings dissolves. After the breakthrough, what remains? In this episode, we meet with Sean Clayton, a man who holds both the quantum field and the human heart in one breath. A teacher who doesn't speak from the mountaintop, but from the dirt, the place where everything real eventually returns. We speak of paradox, of correspondence, of masculine and feminine collapse into union, of spiritual bypassing dressed in beautiful language, of the danger in making gods of our guides. This isn't the episode where we soar. This is the one where we drop, where you're asked to stop running towards transcendence and to turn around, to face the part of you still hiding in the dark, and to love it as if it were light. So, if you've been following the path with discipline, devotion, and the silent hope that enlightenment will deliver you, listen close, because what comes after completion is not relief, it's reality. This is Sean Clayton. This is After Completion.
One thing that I've recognized is that there's so many people that do this work, figure out a lane, get a bunch of affirmation for the things that they do, and then that becomes the new mask they wear. And as I've gone on this journey, oftentimes you wear a mask and you never show people the real you underneath it. And there's a fallibility in all humanness, esoteric practices, religion. We keep like piercing the veil on all of it, being a celebrity, whatever you want to call it, right? Everything right now in this lane of truth, like we're in a really big truth window right now, bigger probably than the world has ever commanded because of the technology, how AI is moving, how social media moves. And for any of us that hold any level of responsibility, it is truly about being able to stand in that truth and become vulnerable and take the mask off and say, okay, what sits underneath it? All this secret society shit, all this stuff that people have hidden, and you have to go read, a freaking, crazy book, right, to figure it out. It's all at our fingertips right now. And I know when I started on this path, I'm like, okay, how can I hold it and keep it and then make sure that I dole out enough for people to know while also remaining relevant? And it took me down a very, one point, a really dark path. And then I'm like, well, let me open it up to individuals and make it less complex. And then what happens there is that you start getting feedback, but then you're not giving yourself your own feedback. You're looking for feedback from social media, right? And I got lost in that for a while. You look for feedback from people telling me that you're like the guy that saves them. And one thing that's in the story of, Jesus, where Jesus talks about his walk is it wasn't about him. He's not here to save anybody, right? He's like, you will do greater things than me. And every time that he pointed back out at that, he was showing people that they had their own power, that they had their own influence, that they had their own love. And I have followed so many gurus and people. Like Joe Dispenza was my dude for a while. Like I was like hanging with that guy. Like he was the dude. And I got lost in his world and I got lost in others. And I'm like, okay, well, who's the next guy that's got the thing? And then I wanted to be the next guy that had the thing. And that was such an ego trip, even though it was like all about not having an ego. It was really very big paradox. And so recently, I mean, I've like paused my social media for a second, and people are like, dude, you're crazy. You got all this momentum and everybody's following you and they're sharing. And I'm like, there's an aspect of self that starts to poison the well when you're not dealing with yourself. And being able to come back home and make sure that in the law of correspondence, the Hermetic principles, we can talk about this in a second, that truly as above, so below, as you do one thing, you do all things. You can't hide from yourself. And when you're putting things out there into the world, if any part of you is not in full integrity, you will poison the well at some point. And if I've got a responsibility of, social media of 440,000 people that are now following this thing, which is super cool, then am I giving them all of me, or am I only giving them what they want to hear? And am I living in an illusion and a lie that needs to be more integrated? And we'll talk about, there's a part of it that I stopped really feeling and knowing the things that I was saying because I forgot to feel them. And those are two totally different things. And most of us don't. We use this spirituality to bypass, to then go chase after an answer. And I can very much so articulate the answer in here really well. And I thought that I was like embodying it, and I was giving this stuff out to the world, and people were following it. People were listening to it, and people were saying, hey, this is the thing, and you're helping me with my journey, which I was. But every person that opens a door for you, if you don't find your own door, you're going to get lost in somebody else's door. And a lot of people were getting lost in my door.
Yeah, that resonates. You were talking about Christ as well, who never really professed any teachings. He was just the embodiment of love. And he couldn't be the embodiment if he didn't live up through his virtue and be the example. And I see that as very powerful, and I definitely see that in you. And even though we don't know each other very well, you were very vulnerable with me and open with me about transitions, right? And feeling them and living them and recognizing the divinity in your humanity. That to me is beautiful. And that's one of the biggest things I'm really bringing into me now, the ability to love my humanity. From those experiences that I had when I was young, I denied the existence of something far greater than being human, being a physical body, because I perceived it, but I didn't know how to integrate it, as you said. And so I was living this split life, and that's why I felt lonely. But in fully coming into my body, that's when I started to realize that, like, this is it. This is it now. And it's only just now sinking into my DNA. Truly. And I hear that in you too, because we're on this onset of knowledge, as you say, truth, as you say. But what does it really mean if we don't integrate it into our virtue? That's powerful. And if we let that accelerate too fast and we don't catch up with it with who we are, we're just going to be imbalanced and it's going to crumble. So I thank you for that. I think that's awesome. And your work is, you do practice what you preach. I see it in you and in what you say. So you're being humble to a degree, but I do appreciate that. So from the lens of how you have checks and balances on yourself, obviously you can't necessarily rely on feedback from social media, from anybody else. I would imagine you have an inner circle that you trust, and then also some systems to that as well, because you have tons of systems for everything. So what's your way to orient yourself to reflect where you're at in your life and make sure that you feel aligned? How do you do that on a regular basis?
So it starts, for me, it used to be one way, now it's turning into another. So I'm going to kind of talk about what it was, because there's a book by Rudolf Steiner called The Way of Initiation that it talks about I believe it was his spiritual journey and the things that start to come up as you get deeper into the rabbit hole. And I feel like there's a part of it that's missing out of this. There's never a last phase, because there's no last, there's no beginning, because there's no time. But the phase, I feel like there's a phase of missing in there that really is integrated around a deeper feeling construct. It's kind of lacking across most religious teachings, most esoteric teachings, no matter what you read. Like I've read all the Israel Guard stuff. I've read, Second Coming of Christ. I've got the Manly P. Hall books. I mean, I got them all.
Me too.
I've got a lot of stuff in here. So I'm like, I've gone, Kabbalah and like Sufism, and I've read and studied how all this stuff integrates. And what started to happen is what I was doing is I had these groups that we were all, I call it spiritual masturbation. We were all like jacking ourselves off in front of each other, being like, we got this. I know this sounds gross for a lot of people, but we got this. And that was when I was in this, I would call it this Joe Dispenza world, deep in plant medicine world. And you felt like you had community, which you did. And it was a version of community. And then you start to like grow through these ascension stages, and you start to cerebralize and being able to communicate what you're doing. And then you break away from them. And something crazy happens for you to have to break through that, to be like, okay, now I'm on my own. And then you start judging that old group that you were in. And it was like, at one point it felt like a cult. And then I jumped out of it. And then I'm like, okay, well, I need to stand in my own sovereignty. And that sovereignty word is really, really dangerous, because when we think of sovereignty, we think it's alone, we think it's ourselves, but it really is us being able to build a container of self that is vulnerable enough to be able to receive the influence of others. But in the knowing of self, like this is like the hard part about the spiritual journey, because if you don't know yourself, right, you don't know why you're here. Why am I here? Right? You don't have you keep wearing this mask that's been this arrested development version of your childhood self that keeps creating protection mechanisms, whatever your addiction is that you built in order to stay safe. Those things keep people away from you. And even though you appear sovereign, you appear like you got it together, which this is, I'll go a little bit deeper into my path. This is a lot of me. You, as a human being, I did not take the mask off. And so all of the things that made me, after the childhood sexual abuse and incarceration, suicide attempts, and all the stuff that I went through, I got so good at being able to work the matrix and think through things that I could put together systems and structures and combine nuances of religion across numerology and whatever it might be. And then people were like, oh yeah, that's a path. And it made a lot of sense because it mapped all this stuff together, even breaking down Tesla's 369, like all this crazy stuff. And, angel numbers and what they really mean, and dimensional analysis. And that's cool. That's great. But if you can't embody it, it doesn't mean anything. So I got so far away from people that then I became, for me, this person that created this authority without being able to feel the empathy of even when people were lost in this process. So I'd have people join the classes. So the hard part about it is that every teacher needs a teacher. Okay, every teacher needs a guide. Every guide needs a guide, right? And the ultimate guide is the divine, right? But even in that, we believe that we're all one, which we are. But there's a stratification of when you move through the world that you have to find help. You have to find people to lean on. So what I used to think is I didn't need help. Like I knew it all and had it all together, and I could receive stuff, and I'd go take, do a 5-MeO pen and drop in, download. I go to an ayahuasca journey, download, right? I would have some crazy meditation where I'm doing, this stuff here with these like sensei headsets and neuro training and whatever, download. And so I could just pull stuff out of the field, and that became my practice. And then I would teach it to people, and then I would put out a video, and then people would be like, yeah, that's a thing. And then I would go into community, and I would be one of like the 2 or 3 guys that knew stuff nobody else knew. And then you would get affirmed again, this whole like spiritual masturbation, bypassing that I was doing. What's happened more recently is I saw how much that was impacting not only my community, because like talking with me was like drinking out of a fire hose, and I was wildly unempathetic about being able to slow down enough for somebody to understand or receive what was happening. So they would get lost. They would find this one thing, and it was like hooking onto some kite going 1,000,000 miles an hour, and they'd be out in outer space somewhere. And I'd be like, yeah, you got it. Like you're figuring it out. Feel all the feelings, do all the things. And and nobody was around them to be able to take that like one thing they got, and now all of a sudden they're like, a million miles away from everybody and lost. And that alone feeling that you had when you were younger, the alone feeling I had, was me finding and hooking onto something that had no structure, had no help, had no assistance, nobody to come around and be like, hey, like, let's all sit down and talk about this. How is this going to impact your entire life? How are you disassociating from humanity? And what does humanity really mean? And it requires, what's the shift that's changed for me is it's required for me to step back into my relationship with my earthly partner in a different way, to be able to, instead of me feeling like I've got it all figured out, like, how do we do this thing together? Because if my home is messed up, if I'm not leaning into her on a daily basis, how can I help anybody else?
Yeah.
Right. And I used to say, well, like, if you want to be financially well off, like, make sure you're taking care of your woman, because if you do this, everything multiplies. And there's a version of that. But it's less about the financial well off. It's about like truly being healthy, truly being able to take off the mask of arrested trauma that sat inside of you, and then be able to connect with somebody in a vulnerable state. And when your wife or your husband can accept that version of you, they've dealt with themselves, because a lot of the reason that they even attracted themselves to you is because you both carried this wall and this window of trauma with each other. That's how you found each other to work it out. Well, 99% of the time. And then once you truly take it off and see each other, and people don't take off and run away, that's your person. And once you can do that with that individual, what happens is, and this is what I felt like, Yeshua and Mary Magdalene did. This is what I feel like, if you know the story of Moses and his wife. There's a lot of these stories that have been across time. Whenever you can do that, all of a sudden, what the man is able to integrate and what the woman is able to intuit moves into this vessel of unified sovereignty that creates an example for the world to lean into. And then community comes around that. Then community helps you. Then community holds you accountable to some of your addictions, to some of your faults, to some of your trauma patterns, whatever it is, right? And that's how we create this ascension process. And then cool stuff comes through. It's like, oh, well, this is how, if you're stuck in Christianity and you believe that it's a limiting thing based on you have to go through this one guy to get there, let's talk about that. And I'll show you some stuff that'll help you pierce the veil and find the mysticism within that version of Christianity that helps you become your most magical you. That's there's the structure, but it starts here first, and then it goes to these other areas. If you're Jewish and you're like, hey, like, I know this makes sense, but there's something else outside of it. And then there's this mystical aspect inside of the Kabbalah that can lean you into that path to help you break through that veil. And you can start seeing your religion, which you've already known, to then map you into something further. Great. If you're Buddhist, yeah, you can do the Buddhist stuff, but there's also another deeper teaching that sits behind Buddhism. And it all is the same thing. Now that's the esoteric stuff we chase. But we never do the homegrown thing that allows us to be still in that and stop chasing and just receive and remember who we are. Instead of trying to save, we heal. Right. And we remember how to do that.
Yeah, that resonates on deep levels. It echoes one thing that I've been starting to recognize in the collective. And as you would probably agree, that's because I've been coming to this realization on my own. And this healing community essence, we need to start conceiving of a world post-healing. Otherwise, it's just going to be big pharma all over again, just with spiritual communities where we're always giving people an antidote instead of living life and creating.
Yep.
That's the truth of it. But I also ask myself all the time, do I just like esotericism and alchemy and hermeticism and all these different languages? Is that just my language, right? Are we all just learning the deepest truth, which is you go into life, you compare yourself to others because of the illusion of separation. You take on things that you're not. You deconstruct those things. Through vulnerability, you show who your true self is, and then you stand in the greatest power. And it seems like that is the arc, right? In many ways. That's when we become infinite. We realize we are everything, we are nothing. I'm just going to be.
Yeah.
instead of trying to figure it out so much. But I do still see the value of structure. I see the
Mhm.
value of learning these tools, learning these principles, because without somebody coming like yourself and giving some type of roadmap for growth and for truth and integrating it as in virtue, it's easy to get lost in the illusion again. And if you look back at history and across all the ages, it seems like we keep slipping. We keep falling
Mhm.
into the same patterns of power over or comparison or whatever it is. So, what do you think that's all about? Do you think
Yeah.
that's because we're learning? Like, do you think that's embedded in the system of infinity? Or is there a way for us to finally overcome these cycles?
It's definitely embedded in the system of infinity, but it doesn't mean that it's not meant to stay that way. There is
Mm.
the reason we die is because there is an end to this physical body. Okay. So we recognize there's an end to the physical body. Then what is that end? And does it require an end to the physical body for us to be able to have that death to create the evolution? We all evolve once time and space disappear, right?
Mm.
And time just allows space to move, right? If there was no time, this whole thing would be just a static picture. It would be like me just holding up this notebook,
Yeah.
right? But if I start moving the pages, oh, there's a story in here. And so each and every one of us associated with time has a version of the story, but we don't understand what time really is. And the thing that I've recognized is that there are these 9 dimensions that cascade down reality into the single point of unity.
Mm.
And inside of each one of those different 9 dimensions, there's only people be like, there's 144, there's all this other stuff. Yeah, but I mean,
It's a spectrum.
yeah, but when you put all the numbers together, you bring to the digital root, there's only 9 numbers in the universe, 1 through 9. There's 0
Mm.
that's basically an infinite set movement. And the structure is the same structure that sits at the deepest level of our subatomic particles and our DNA and everything else. So the beautiful thing of where science has gone, and I'm going to answer the full question here. I usually go around the block a few times to answer the question,
It's
but
cool. Let's do it.
the reason that science is so cool and what it's really unlocking for us is being able to see the depth of the as above, so below in real life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it's demystifying the mysticism that a handful of individuals were given that allows for those people to stay in power and in influence.
Mm.
So the process of the closed loop system that keeps repeating itself is just the ego that doesn't let go. That allows everybody to find the magic and mysticism in themselves. You take somebody like Yeshua or Jesus, whatever you want to call him, who came along and said, hey, you know what? I'm going to go study all this other stuff. And I'm going to bring it back into Judaism. And I'm going to walk across this land and I'm going to show people that there is another way. And the Essenes knew this, right? And there were several other, groupings that knew this. And this is why he went into the temple and started kicking ass. Because he was like, look, guys, I'm going to tell these people stuff. And how dare you limit individuals from their own ability to know who they are,
Yeah.
or why they're really here. And what happens is if the construct that has kept the arrested development of childhood safe, that is like, hey, I don't want people to know this because I won't be rich anymore. I won't be magical anymore. I won't know something nobody else knows. I won't be able to sell my book for $49 if everybody knows how I got to make the book, right? I won't have psychic or tarot practices, or I won't be able to do past life regression therapies for $1,000 an hour, or I won't be able to lead a Dr. Joe meditation retreat for $2,000 a person with 2,000 people making $4 million, and and then asking people while they're there to donate to my society.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, that's crushing it. You do one a month, it's $48 million a year. That's a fair bit. And he's doing better than a lot of NFL players in the league, right? Which, as he should, because he's helping people. On the other side of it, we've created all these limited access points that allow individuals to extract value in a way that keeps people in their addictions.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can do that, then I hold a power over others because my ego has limited the access, right, so that I can be the God. And it's the same God that the demiurge God, it's the same God at Gnosticism that created separation. It's the same God that looked at the devil and said, devil, you're bad. It's the same God that gave us a lens of judgment. Mm-hmm. And that's not the God of all. That's the God of duality that we prop up, that we said, hey, there's a white guy in the clouds that gives us an answer and a direction to go. It's the one that's painted on the Sistine Chapel. That's that God. And that's the God that allows for judgment and rule and suppression to happen in this world. But when we understand the real God that sits around that loves both this other one and the devil, right? When we understand that all that was created from that source is unity, then we all tap into a magical aspect that sits inside of our purpose.
Yeah.
And the way to get there now, and we recognize this, was hidden from us in the very first book of most religious texts. And that was when Eve bit the apple and then was blamed by man and was cast away and was judged and said, no, it was her and not, I'm not going to stand by her. And I guarantee you, had man stood by his woman at that time, the unification of the power that they hold, even in maybe her decision that was against this demiurge God, was like, hey, I'm going to stand in this. And then the reward that would have happened would have been something that limited them from being separate and truly associated back with the image of the divine. And that's where magic happens. So it's that unification of masculine and feminine, which is why it's the last in the Hermetic laws. When you get to that 7, you get to that point, and I'll, if people don't know what the Hermetic laws are, I'll walk through those in a second. But the 7th law is the law of gender. It's bringing masculine and feminine together. No accident that in the Bible, keep the Sabbath holy. The 7th day, you keep holy.
Yeah.
When you do those two things, magical stuff starts to happen in your life.
Going back to correspondence, right? There is the physical, earthly plane of the masculine, the feminine. We find the feminine other and we balance the pole in that way.
Right.
But what about the highest macrocosmic view of that? What is your perception of that experience? Because all tools, all symbols, all stories, they're really just giving us words and systems that we can feel and give us the feeling experiences of the true archetypes or origins of things that we can't really describe through words. But if you're trying to do some kind of recognition that everything you're perceiving in life is something that exists inside of you, how would you balance the relationship with the woman in yourself as you reflect on the self?
So when you're talking about, I want to repeat this back to you a little bit. So when you're talking about, as far as self, of how those two, how the masculine and feminine intertwine within, is that what we're getting at? Okay.
Yeah, let's do that.
And if we do that from an as above, so below perspective, the divine is all one, then how does that, if you were to look at that through correspondence, how does the divine then end up resolving that? And how should we resolve that within self without having to go outside of ourselves to find the answer?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Yeah,
it was a horribly framed
question. It was great. It was great. Yeah, so it's like, one of the coolest, quantum entanglement. I mean, I'm sure you've probably seen, there you go, that thing, right?
I've seen that thing before.
Okay, you've seen that thing. Okay, I just drew it when we were talking. But that thing is if you look at quantum entanglement, how it looks just like that. Okay. At the largest, most expansive version of the divine, the samadhi was that. It was that moment in time, that's that instant when life was created, that it was like, okay, I recognize myself in my fullness. I recognize the balance of the give and the take, or the give and receive, or the take. I recognize the balance of, the phallic and the non-phallic, right? Things have to go inside of each other. Like this pen right now is literally sitting in air, and the air is if you were to use sexual terms, the penis. I mean, the air is the vagina and this is the penis, right? I mean, it's like, this could not exist if there was not a space to receive it. And what's sitting around it is the space to receive it. This also could not exist if you were not looking at it and I was not talking about it. It not collapse into full wave function based on all the potential here.
Right.
And so the collapsing of the wave function in quantum physics, right, is literally the masculine organizing itself in integration. It's the integration and organizing itself. The ability to then receive that is saying, okay, well, what is it that I need at this very specific moment in time for me to have this conversation? I couldn't have the conversation with the pen without the pen being here. Yeah. I could, but it would be imaginative and not as impactful, right? I couldn't make a phone call to somebody and interdimensionally communicate with them without a phone being here. So literally the fitness of my life, is right here in this phone. And the way that we resolve ourselves and show up within is that we were given all of these tools inside of ourselves. We were born into this perfect vessel. And we have inside of us masculine, feminine parts, whether we like it or not. We have a very specific organization of giving and receiving. And being a masculine avatar of a human being means that there's a very specific frequency that slants a little bit more. It is always going to be out of balance. I'm never going to have the intuition of my life, ever. Ever. I don't care. People were like, yeah, you will. No, you won't. I will never be able, and I'm going to surrender to that. But also the testosterone in my body, what I was built from, she's never going to go bench press 300 pounds. And she's never going to want to, right? I'm never going to be able to have a baby out of my body. And if I do, then I don't even know where we're going to be as human beings. I don't want to be there. I mean, maybe that's cool, but
you got to wear that hat if you do.
Yeah. Now I can take the pieces of my body and manipulate person pieces of me so I can feel more embodied as that, if that's where my body's calling. And no judgment against somebody that says, hey, I want to have a sex change.
Right.
I want to do something different with that. Cool. Right. But the reality of it is that whatever you were built into at that moment in time is perfectly constructed. And what sits inside of you is your ability to balance those two things together. Because as me growing up, if you looked at the transitions of my life from what I looked like when I was younger, when I went through sexual abuse, I couldn't grow a beard until like 8 years ago. I didn't have muscle mass or any muscles or anything like that until more recently, when I started to embody more of my masculinity. Because being raped and abused from 9 to 14, you start to, your thoughts definitely become things.
Wow.
You don't feel strong. You don't feel big. You don't feel these things. And so my mind literally warped my body into something that was smaller, something that was thinner, something that I felt like would be accepted by the first woman that ever accepted me at 16 years old. And I kept that version of me almost locked into whatever look that was until another woman accepted me, and then it evolved. It was like the weirdest video game I think you could probably ever imagine. And then at one point, the Sophia who saw me as what I really could be as a man, she saw me differently. And then all of a sudden I started to evolve again, and I started to look different. I started to bulk up and grow and all these other things.
Wow.
And it was wild to see that transition, because people look at me 20 years ago and it wasn't that, but I had to answer the question, go back to a space to where I found that balanced internal masculine, feminine within. And then what it was from a corresponding perspective is that I started to tune into what the divine masculine and feminine version held. And then what happens is, when you tune into that, you start to receive the frequency. And this is when divine knowledge starts to roll in without you ever having to pick up a book. And you can walk in that state and give that information out. And I can draw a picture of what it kind of looks like in my head, the way that it functions. But there's always a resonant field of the divine that is perfect. And it looks like that yin yang. It's a perfectly balanced masculine, feminine. It's always perfect in giving and receiving. There's no judgment associated with that quantum entanglement. And we have a little bit of a slanted version one way or another. And some of us, if I were to draw out that yin yang, it's way too far black or way too far white, right? And so the amount of information we can receive is limited. And then what we do is we try to fit and find, if we're hyper masculine, for instance, we try to fit and find women that will chip away at all these pieces, but we end up hurting them because that's how we are. And if it's hyper feminine, they do the same thing. They're like, I'm going to hack away at somebody that's maybe not masculine at all, and I'm going to gobble that up. And that was the way that my relationships used to show up, until I found somebody that would show me how to balance this out. And I didn't really get what that looked like.
Yeah, that's amazing. Did you say your wife's name is Sophia?
Sophia, yeah, it's wild.
How fitting. Yeah, how fitting.
No fucking idea.
That's so cool. So cool. Yeah, it's a shame that I'm just going to have to vet out whoever I marry by what her name is.
My name,
sorry,
yeah.
This doesn't align. That's so cool. But I think that's beautiful too. One thing you're very vocal about is your relationship and your relationship with your family in general. I know you have a son as well.
Yeah.
And you consistently are open and vulnerable about how you put more and more emphasis on that, especially as your journey has continued.
Mm.
And I'm curious because this is something I've always felt on an intuitive level. But as you've gone on in life, has it been more challenging to find deep connection from the external world because of people wanting things from you? Or is it still a feasible thing to go out in life and like just be a human being?
It's definitely so. There's kind of a curve that happens. Okay, so in the curve, you start out and you're like you connect with everybody. I'm going to call like the bottom of the curve here. I should just draw it, but the bottom of the curve is you can connect really well with people because you're grounded. Okay,
Mm.
then all of a sudden you start to go through this kind of like ascension you believe that you're going through, and you're getting information. You're like, oh, you start judging everything that you were grounded off of because this side of the curve, you have like a bell curve. Okay,
Mm.
that side of the curve was your old you. And that old you is built off of your parental trauma. So all the people in your life look like that. You guys go out and drink, smoke, do whatever it might be, which no judgment. Those things are great. I just had a drink earlier today. So I'm totally fine. Don't care. Like people are like, I shouldn't drink. I'm like, yeah, have a cocktail. It's cool. Maybe not drink too much, but until you do the things that helped you kind of euthanize that at that moment in time that you had an example of it. Then you all of a sudden have some breakthrough and you're like, oh, my breakthrough happened when I first like found some Dr. Joe stuff, went down that path, then I did ayahuasca, and opened up more, and then I became a spiritual asshole. It was a whole thing. Seriously. And I got up to the top of this curve and I was so far away from everybody. I was lonely, I was far away, and I felt like I was on the mountaintop. And I'm looking down and I could have stayed there. And this is where cults get built. This is where gurus start to evolve. This is where you become very lonely. And there's many teachers, that you would see, and I'm not going to say any of them have it figured out, but you've got and they're all extremely prolific. Your Ram Dass's, your Alan Watts, you could just go down the whole list of them. They sit
Right.
at this pinnacle, and all of a sudden they're really lonely. And then what they do is they sit up here, and then they make it taller and taller and taller and taller. And what happens is the world starts to prop them up, and they never come back down the other side of the hill. Okay, so coming back down the other side of the hill means that you actually created a whole hill. You can look back on it and you can actually show people where they are on the hill, and it helps them reintegrate. So when you come back down to earth again and you're on the other side, you have the deepest connections you'd ever even think about, because
Yeah.
you see how they were created off of all the versions of yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, kind of like the overview effect. You look at it from a perspective, you're like, oh, that's really beautiful. I could see that they're kind of in their asshole stage and they're figuring it out. I could see they're actually coming back down from that asshole stage and looking to ground things. And so at the bottom of that hill, at the bottom of that valley, okay, that's where the beauty and the connection starts to happen. And the people totally change, or they actually find their own way on their journey and they meet you on the other side. So like my parents, for instance, we still have some things, right? They still have some attachments to the old versions of my life. And when I do connect with them, it's different. It's not like it used to be. It's no longer, hey, don't come to Christmas anymore. You're a little weird. We think that you think different things about church. They actually, you know what you're saying is cool. And they start crying over it. And they're like, maybe you should come talk to our church, because we never really thought about it this way. Like, I'm getting that kind of an invite now. My son has now met me on the other side of the hill, and I have a deeper connection with him. When I was up here, he hated me, right? My wife, when I got up here, dude. And sometimes you feel like there's, I have an addiction to affirmation, attention, and overthinking. Okay, I do, and I know what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And in order for me to work with that, I have to, one, recognize that it's there,
Mm-hmm.
call it out, right? Because when you name something, you negate it. Kierkegaard says that. Let me name it. Let me actually give it a name, and then let me observe it, and let me actually help it. And why does it exist? It exists because when I was a child and I was abused and raped, what ended up happening is I wanted actually people to see me, and I wanted my mother to hear me. I wanted my grandmother to hear me. I wanted somebody to save me. What did I do is I actually went out into the world and started to create a whole thing where people would see me and hear me.
Mm-hmm.
And it became cool. Like I did it through the lens of spirituality. So then boom,
Right.
like all of this magic comes out from this trauma. But then I was never dealing with that childhood version of myself that put on all these masks and said, oh, okay, well, this is who Sean is. Love me
Right.
for this. And I got a lot of people who love me for it.
Right. But
Yeah.
the beauty there is that you see the shadow and you recognize why it
Yeah.
was necessary in order to bring you to this place where you actually are doing lots of good, right? Let's not forget
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah. I'm not living
um,
in shame over it.
right,
No.
right.
At certain points, you do live in shame over it because you realize how many people you hurt that are the
Hmm.
closest ones to you, even though you might help. If I help 400,000 people, but I hurt the one that I sleep next to every night, if I hurt my son who's learning from me,
Hmm.
is it worth it?
Right. Yeah, no, I totally hear you. And one thing that definitely resonates with my path is when you were talking about this top of the
The
arc
curve.
or the
Yeah.
curve,
Art.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you get to the top of the arc, say you transcend, you transcend, you transcend, and you're divine. You're divine in concert with the knowing of your simultaneous humanity. And as a person who is coming from a place of separation to a place of wholeness, there's the fallibility of perceiving wholeness through its shadow, which is loneliness, especially for somebody who is susceptible to something like that, like myself.
Right.
And one of the beautiful things about that is that kind of conscious descent where life isn't about transcending anymore. It's about
Yeah.
realizing I chose to fucking be here. I chose to be human. And how beautiful and gorgeous is it that I get to do it with the other? I get to experience the feminine part of me. I get to experience all the mirrors around me, all the humans around me, and really start to live. Like to
Right.
me, that seems like what it's about, right? Yes,
Right.
have a drink here and there, like yes, go play, just have fun a little bit. Don't be so hard on yourself. And these are my personal things, right? That I'm confessing that I've been
Right.
going through because it's so easy to find comfort, security, and safety in laws, in truth, even in
Hmm.
meditation, even, but they can be crutches because they're any tool that's outside of what's within distracts us from the truth, which is we are everything.
Right.
And we just want to be held to a degree, and that's to a degree what this is. But
And then what happens is you don't live in judgment over it, but you live in discernment so that you recognize how to heal people. And the person that has helped me the most with that journey is my wife, who said, okay, if you're going to walk down this hill again, this is the steps you need to take. Because the interesting thing about the feminine is they see into the darkness. This is why, like, the ceremonies at night are these feminine ceremonies. We associate the moon, the light of the moon, with the
right.
actual being able to see into the darkness. Every moment in front of me, every moment in the future, I can't see. Right? I can't. That's impossible. But I can look
Mhm.
back and I have all this light on my past, and then I start to make decisions and feelings about what that looks like. So the truth of life starts to happen. Like, why are we here? Is to be able to take this whole time continuum that we're in these three-dimensional bodies that was granted to us by the divine, be able to look back on our past and have full gratitude for it. That's shining light on everything that's ever existed.
Mhm.
What happens is that baby crying that was the past, that felt judged and shamed, the version of us that shows up and says, I'm not worthy. It's like, oh, I am worthy. Thanks for seeing me finally. Thanks for seeing me in the fact that, you actually forgot that I needed your love, older you. And we give ourselves perspective so we can give that love back the same way that God gave itself perspective through the lens of us so it could love itself.
Mhm.
Right? God loves itself because it created us. It gave, like, imagine this. You've got you right now. You've got your younger version of self, all the versions yesterday. You might have said something mean to somebody. You might have been like whatever, judgy. Once you gain a moment past that, you can look back on it and change how you feel about it, and it changes everything. Okay. So if time doesn't exist and the divine's done the whole thing, figured it all out, all it had to do is create us to gain perspective the same
Mhm.
way we gain perspective from our past, to be able to look back at that moment and fall back in love with that moment. So it changes the entire alchemy of it, and it no longer sees it with judgment. So God itself, the divine, is resolved. It's created us, moved beyond space and time. The whole thing looks back and says, man, that was a beautiful thing. Life Sean went through and all the stories that he went through, you know. And when God did that. It just created separation from these different areas so they can go back and love it and change how it felt about those moments. We have the same power. Now, what's interesting about the divine is that once the divine said, okay, now I'm going to actually loop myself back in with this feminine spirit and resolve that, then it started to create all the possibilities in the future. So then it's shining not even shining a light. It's actually stepping into the darkness that was created when it was only light. So like, you study the Kabbalah at all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the Ein Sof, all light, right?
Mm-hmm.
Comes through Keter, all light. And then it's got to go through this shadow of self in order to get back in sovereignty to actually have light within self. But it has to pass through the feminine and masculine parts of the tree in order to get to the bottom and to be full. So once what ends up happening with us as humans is we only resolve the actual right side of the masculine side. And we think that we've got it figured out because there's a whole bunch of doing that we do inside of this three-dimensional body. Right. We don't ever resolve the feminine side. And tell me all of the ways that there are like stories in the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, any of these about the feminine story. It doesn't exist. Right. There's now being books stood up about Anna, the grandmother of Jesus, right? There's all this other stuff that's like popping up and whatnot, but there is no canon that sits there that talks about that feminine story. And so that story is completely lost. And now it's time for it to be rewritten. And so therefore, when that happens, then we start walking into the shadow with confidence and we're no longer afraid of the mask that we wear.
I think that's beautiful. It makes you an archetypal man. This is, beyond just the old scripture. There's also the more, recent Jungian psychology that most people can resonate with today, which talks about the anima, the animus, the different versions of integrating the wholeness of who we are. And I think that's a massive theme. That's one of the concepts I was leaning on when I was asking you about your relationship with your wife, because she's also a reflection of that in you. And you were saying this, but not saying it. And I want to make sure it lands that your relationship with your wife is teaching you something deep about your relationship with the feminine. And to revere that, to respect that, to nurture that, to allow it to change you and let go into it at the same time. These are all parts of the personal path of becoming one, of becoming evolved and growing. So that hits. When I look at your work and I was to synthesize, and forgive me for synthesizing a big body of work.
No, go for it.
What I really feel is somebody who doesn't want to give people intellectual information that sends them down the same path they've been on in other ways. I see somebody who wants to give people the tools to empower them to develop from the inside out into the full realization and embodiment of the divinity and love that they are. That's probably the best way I could put it, because the message I feel is you are your own Messiah. No one's coming to save you. Here's the world you live in. Here's how it works to some degree. Here's enough so that you can go in the sandbox and not get stepped on, right? Yeah. And to me, that's damn cool. But I am reflecting on that on my own journey. And correct me on how you would articulate what your path is like.
Yeah.
But one of the things I've realized is there's no way for me to answer the question. There's no way to answer why am I here. It's who am I? What am I embodying? Right? What am I embodying? And how much am I giving of myself? Because I don't know anything from within until I give it all away, until I let go of all of it. And so if I wasn't creating, if I didn't begin the question, if I didn't begin the journey, I would have had no clue what my inclinations are. I would have no reflection of myself to look back at and say, okay, this is what comes out of my mouth. I might think I'm this one person, but this is the way it shows up. Maybe it's emotional, maybe it's vulnerable, maybe it's a little bit overly poetic. Doesn't matter, right? It's like, that's who I am, and that's what's true. And so I have to lean into that. So I think there's an element of putting yourself out there, being vulnerable, that also resonates.
I went on this big path of, don't think no, right? And then you can be still in your creation. And I was wrong. There's no right or wrong, but I was erroneous in that space because we know nothing. We feel everything. But being a quantum being a person of humanness is about what you can truly feel in every cell of your body. And then choose how that feeling shows up in life. So instead of why am I here, how am I here? Right?
Here I am.
Yeah. How am I showing up every single day? How do I feel those areas of my body? It's I'm going on this really deep lesson within myself right now of like how to truly feel again, how to go back to that time before I was 9 and all those feelings that I used to have that I felt so alive in, and I shut that down in that moment. And then I created an entire system and structure that allowed me to become whatever successful means. And going back to those feelings, I used to never want to feel those feelings because when I felt them again, I wanted to die. There was a point I had to go through of the experiences, like the granular experiences of the abuse, to know how to get back to myself, how to go, it's like if I built a wall here and that wall was, all of the sexual abuse and rape and everything else. And in order to get over that wall, you have to basically take every single brick out of the wall. And most of us, we just bypass and jump over it. The wall's still there. And then you're over here with your feelings and you can't bring them back to you because you created a wall. What I had to do, thumbs up, what I had to do was literally take every single brick out of that wall and see the brick of why I put it there and then go through it to the other side in order to feel again. And when I started to feel again, my empathy for people around me, like I can see somebody's trauma, I can see somebody's feelings, I can see somebody's pain immediately just by sitting with them. I'm like, whoa, like, and now I see what my wife feels because she's like, that person's hurting. I'm like, nah, they're good. But she's like, no, they're really hurting. And I'm like, no, they're good. Now I see it. I'm like, oh, I see what you were seeing. And my thing is when you learn to feel and stop knowing, what'll show up is a miracle. When you stop asking why is great because it helps you understand pieces of the past so that you can show up more present now. And you just, how am I showing up every single day? You embody that being you were talking about. And whatever it is that I'm here to teach, whether I'm here today and gone tomorrow, whatever it is that I've left there for the world, is great, right? But there's also what I always say to people, there's always a little poison in everybody's shit until they figure themselves out. But it's just be able to recognize it for yourself. Take the good parts that you feel are true to you. Leave apart the parts that feel inauthentic. And then find the truth within you of how you can show up every single day and feel the hell out of that. When you could do that, you become your own Messiah.
And the gift of feeling, we avoid suffering so much until we stop feeling. And then once we feel anything, once we get to the point where we don't feel anything, suffering becomes a gift because it's like, fuck, at least I feel something.
Yep, that's it.
It's like and then I'm back to reality. I'm back to who I am. What if wholeness wasn't something you arrived at, but something that arrived when you stopped arriving? Sean reminded me that the treasure at the end of the path was never an object, never a state, never a title. It was presence, not the easy kind, the kind that asks you to stay when it would be easier to leave, the kind that doesn't fix but feels, doesn't claim but communes. This wasn't the hero's triumphant return. This was the spiral collapsing back into center. A teacher who no longer needs to teach. A seeker who no longer needs to seek. Completion is not a finish line. It's a field, silent, alive, and waiting for you to be. No fanfare, no grand finale, just your own breath echoing back at you. Here I am.